Were people voting on your failure in local councils or the failure of your Prime Minister?
Well, I think obviously people will vote on individual issues in different areas, and it's not up for me to look into the minds of individual voters.
Do you need to convince your party you can do better in a general election?
Well, as I said, if Keir Starmer was in Harlow on Wednesday saying that was a place that he needed to win in order to win the next general election, that hasn't happened. We still haven't got the results from places like Tees Valley with the Mayoralty results, which again is a key battleground. I'm focused completely on the job at hand. That's delivering for people across the country. If you just look at what we're doing in the last week or so alone, a £900 tax cut hitting people's payslips, the first failed asylum seeker off to Rwanda. At the same time, what have Labour said? Well, they said that they are going to scrap the Rwanda scheme and, as far as I can tell, offer an amnesty to illegal migrants. That's no way to solve that problem, which is important to people right up and down the country.
You're not seriously going to cling on to Harlow, because then I'll hit you with Rushmore, Hartlepool, Thurrock, Peterborough Council, much of North East Lincolnshire. So let's be honest with each other. This is a night of disaster. What do the Conservatives have to do now?
Look, I think there are some mixed results in different places as well, Nick, and there are still a lot of results still to come. But you're right to say that it isn't a great result for us.
Doesn't the Blackpool South result blow a big hole in the Tories' argument that people don't want to switch directly from the Conservative Party to Labour? That's exactly what they did in near record numbers.
I mean, did they? Because I thought Labour get more votes than they did in 2019. So.
One of the questions is, how confident would you be that you can translate these kinds of things into Westminster gains? Because these are a complicated set of elections. You've picked out a few examples there of where you hope you'll be able to build on.
We've only had a few results in, to be fair. But
that's the case you're making.
Yeah, but that's quite a swing, isn't it? I mean, you'd be toast if there was a 16% swing to Labour, wouldn't you?
Let's show you it again.
You now look behind you, and just 3 points behind you is Reform. You won by party run by 117 votes. If you were coming into the Melling Lane of the Melling Road of the Grand National, you're likely to be overtaken in the turn, aren't you, by Reform?
Well, look, I think it's very clear, and I saw those results from. I was actually campaigning for the Conservatives back in 2014, where we saw UKIP actually sweeping up parliamentary constituencies right across the country. And that's not the case with Reform. Reform have managed another third place finished in Blackpool.
117 votes.
Exactly, and UKIP were winning, seats, and Reform were briefing out tonight that they might come first earlier in the evening. Right. It's quite clear. It's really nothing has been crystallised from this result, from the results we've seen previously in places like Kingswood. All a vote for Reform does is help Keir Starmer and the Labour Party.
The swing from the Conservative Party to the Labour Party is the third biggest since the Second World War. People have seen Nick's statistics just a moment ago. How do you account for the scale of that loss?
Well, I think there's a few points to put very specifically about Blackpool South. Obviously, the circumstances of the individual by-election were not great. The fact that during the campaign, an MP in a neighbouring seat lost the Conservative whip was not very helpful either. And obviously the fact that Reform, came up. Is not good either for us, although it's quite clear from that result that all Reform voters, people vote for Reform, are doing helping the Labour Party. There's no doubt that Reform votes for Reform will help Labour in a general election scenario. There's no doubt about that, and I think when people do see that, the reality of that, as we're seeing in several different areas tonight, then that's people will also understand that, I think, even more viscerally than they have that sort of perhaps theoretical argument before. What I would also say, though, is there have been some areas where we've held out against quite big pressure from Labour. We gained a seat in Newcastle upon Tyne for the first time in 32 years. Doc Anand, somebody who campaigned for me back in 2019 and campaigned in those local elections I was talking about in Durham in 2021.
What evidence do you have from the successive by-election defeats, or the fact that you're potentially going to lose hundreds of council seats, what evidence do you have that the problem is just messaging? Because it might well be that people look at the consistent results, the constant Conservative losses, and say, actually, it's not messaging, it's the people with the policies.
As we've reduced national insurance contributions for people in work by a third, opposed by the Labour Party, on all those issues. Can I just say, no, let me answer the question. Let me answer the question, right?
Well, I'm not stopping you answering the question, Mr. Holden. I'm stopping you repeating the answer to a question you've already answered.
No.
You've given this list at least 3 times now.
The question was very much, right, on those individual policies, what is it, right? The truth is that we need to be talking about them consistently and all the time, because that's the difference. I think that when it comes to it, the messaging around those, it's all about us being consistent and getting our message across, showing the British people that we're on their side. I think we've got the policies which are showing that. We've stood behind them during the pandemic, but a huge amount of support there. Stood behind them during the energy crisis and inflation.
You've got the right man, Mr. Holden. Clearly the messaging is wrong, because you've just sustained the third highest swing from Conservatives and Labour since the Second World War, and in council seats, for every 2 you fight, you lose 1. That's a 50% attrition rate. This is like Passchendaele or the Somme. You're not getting if the man's right, what's wrong with the messaging, Mr. Holden?
I wouldn't quite put it like that, and I'd also say, Nick,
you're sending councillors over the top, one of whom is not to return. How else do you characterise it?
Do you still think that replacing the Prime Minister would be the right way to go?
Look, I got asked the same question by Nick on
but a lot's happened since then, hasn't it? A lot's happened since then.
Robinson, and nothing's changed since what I said just a few hours ago. My stance always is the same, but I'm not sure that colleagues are going to be putting the letters in. So we're working with what we've got. Yes, I think we shouldn't have got rid of Boris in the first place, but we are where we are, and it's looking unlikely that the MPs are going to put the letters in. So we've got to pull together. I think we need to find a role for Boris as well, to ensure that we show that, we are a united front, we can heal wounds, but ultimately have common sense policies. People are sick of this, wokist agenda from the left, which has impact on every institution. They want a government to stand up, be proud to be British, and to be a voice for them.
One last thought. Is Rishi Sunak safe as your party leader and Prime Minister?
No, absolutely. And I think the crucial thing on this is that these are local election results coming off a very high watermark in 2021, where councils like Durham, where I represent, was lost by Labour for the first time in 102 years. These are coming off very exceptional results. We've still got a long way to go, but the Prime Minister is actually in a very strong position.
When is that general election going to be? How much longer can you keep people hanging on?
Well, as the Prime Minister's already said, answer to your second question first, Suzanne, the general election is going to be in the second half of the year, as the Prime Minister has already made clear.
So no chance of an imminent or summer general election. You're totally ruling that out this morning.
The Prime Minister has made clear that the general election will be in the second half of the year. That's what everybody's expecting to happen. I think more broadly...
Sorry, Richard, the second part of this year could be July.
Well, the Prime Minister has said most likely in the autumn and in the second half of the year.